And with our work session on the 11th of November, it's 9:01. And who will be presenting?
Good morning, councillors. It will be community planning staff, Michael Salas and Susan Ellinger, and other staff are here to answer questions that the council may have. So this is a project that we have been working on since the Gorge Commission and staff updated the management plan. It took them 3 years to update that plan. And when they submitted it to Clark County, we had 270 days to bring our code inconsistent with the changes to the management plan, and that's what we have done. So with that, I'll turn it over to Michael and Susan, and they will be giving the presentation. You may have seen some of this before, but included in this is how we staff responded to questions posed to us by the Clark County Planning Commission, and then the recommendation of the Planning Commission. All that will be part of our discussion with Council this morning. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mike and Susan. Thank you.
Thank you, Oliver. So basically, Oliver and Susan and I will give you a quick presentation. I know we've discussed this back in August, but a lot's changed since then. So I'm hoping that this will give some clarity and in a way for us to move forward towards the council public hearing. Next slide. So before we get too far down the road, I wanted to just go over the agenda for what we're talking about today. And so basically, I'm gonna give you a quick background of how we got to where we're at, and then talk about the Gorge Ordinance update overview, and then changes to chapters 4240, and also changes to 4100, 4510, and 3208. After that, we'll have sort of the next steps, and then any questions and comments that you may have at the end. As well as we want to make sure that you see, or at least be able to be informed with how we got to this point from the Planning Commission's side of things as well. So next slide. So here's a quick background. The Columbia River Gorge Scenic Area was established by federal law and interstate compact in 1986 and in 1987. The Gorge Commission is to establish, implement, and enforce policies and programs that protect the National Scenic Area. In 1991, the Gorge Commission and the Forest Service adopted a management plan which helps keep consistent standards and regulations within the Columbia River Gorge Scenic Area. The management plan is required to be updated every 5 to 10 years. And the Gorge Scenic Area encompasses approximately 1.8% of the total acreage within Clark County. Next slide. So here is the Gorge area within its entirety, the scenic area. And if you look where the 14 is, that line, along with the boundary between Clark County and Scenic County, identifies an area that is approximately just less than 8,000 acres that encompasses for Clark County side of the scenic area. Next slide. And here's a quick overview. In October 13th, 2020, the Gorge Commission adopted revisions to the management plan as part of the 3-year update. The Gorge Commission focused on updates to increase protections in the scenic natural resource chapters, as well as economic development, land uses, urban area boundary revisions, and recreation chapters. The county adoption of revisions is mandatory under the National Scenic Area Act, which protects the Columbia River Gorge Scenic Area, along with RCW 4397015, the Columbia River Gorge Compact. Variations are allowed if it provides greater protection for gorge resources. Next slide. In addition, like Oliver had mentioned earlier, the county has 270 days from March 16, 2021 to adopt these revisions by December 11, 2021. Once the council approves the ordinance amendments, the Gorge Commission will go through their own public hearing process. Ordinance amendments go into effect after the Gorge Commission and the Secretary of Agriculture concur that the code as amended is consistent with the management plan. Next slide. Here are some of the changes. This is definitely not all of the changes, but some of the changes that we brought up back in August, and also the changes that we brought up during the Planning Commission hearing. So update to wetland protection policies to require a no loss of wetlands rather than a previous standard of no net loss. Allow cideries to follow the same guidelines established by wineries. Allow fruit and produce stands to sell a broader range of agricultural products and other incidental materials. Include new guidelines in some land use designations for owner-occupied overnight accommodations, limit to 90 room nights per year. Exempts buildings that are 1,500 square feet or less from the compatibility guidelines for scenic resource protection. Next slide. Update guidelines for recreational developments, including new recreation settings, descriptions for each recreational intensity class under this. And then the next is the requirement for new agricultural dwellings on large-scale agricultural and special management area agricultural zone lands from 40,000 to 80,000 in gross agricultural income due to inflation over time. And we'll go, this was one of the questions that Oliver previously mentioned the Planning Commission had, and we can go in a little bit more detail than that later in the presentation. The last one is change to include transportation and mineral resource in the definition for exploration, development, extraction, and excavation, and production of mineral resources. Next slide. And so from here, I think I'm having Susan sort of go over the additional changes from this point on, and then we'll come back to me afterwards. Susan, do you want to start?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Good morning, counselors. For the record, my name is Susan Ellinger, and I'm with Community Planning. In developing the amendments to Chapter 4240, the Gorge section of the code, we identified a few other code sections that needed amendments due to the changes in the management plan. The first is a change to the definitions in 4100, and that's to better outline different types of decisions that are made through the land use process. Type 1 and Type 2 decisions are those that are made by staff, and those are all going to be referred to now as administrative decisions. And Type 3 decisions go to the hearing examiner, and those are now referred to as examiner decisions. The next change is to the procedures section of the code, which is Chapter 4510. And this change will provide consistency with the management plan, and it outlines that appeals of examiner decisions on properties within the gorge are heard by the Gorge Commission. Similarly, code changes were required to the enforcement section of the code regarding appeals in Chapter 3208. And finally, you may remember some code changes that came to you earlier this year regarding the use of email versus postal mail in the land use process. And we're now proposing similar changes to Chapter 4240 for consistency. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the language in the management plan that necessitated the changes relating to appeals in chapters 4510 and 3208. Here, the language in the management plan references the National Scenic Area Act, and in that first paragraph outlines that appeals of decisions relating to the implementation of the National Scenic Area Act are heard by the Gorge Commission. Below that are the policies, and the first policy relates to land use actions, and the second policy relates to enforcement actions. Next slide, please. This slide outlines revisions since the Planning Commission hearing, and there are some very minor changes relating to references of other code sections in several places, but also the addition of the proposed changes to Chapter 3208. And the amendments to Chapter 3208 were not required to be reviewed by Planning Commission. This process is outlined in Chapter 4560, which only requires Planning Commission to review amendments to Title 40. And since Title 32 is separate from Title 40, it therefore did not require Planning Commission review. So it is coming forward to you now. And I'm going to turn the presentation back to Mike at this point.
Thanks, Susan. Next slide. So this map is one that we put together to help the Planning Commission's question on who would be affected or how many parcels would be affected by the ag income test. So the ones that this applies to is large scale ag and excuse me, and the SMA Act, which is the Special Management Area Ag. So the areas that are identified in red show the areas that we're talking about, and these are large scale 80 and 40, and then the other is the actual Special Management Area Ag as well. There is one little area that's in green that is considered a federal forest land that is not part of this, but the others are. Next slide. So one of the things that we wanted to do is show how many parcels would be affected by this income test. And so there's 108 parcels within this area. There's approximately 2,800 acres, 60 units that are existing, and what the real number that you want to see is lots without houses. There's 48 lots without houses, but out of those 48, 23 are publicly owned, which leaves 25 lots that would be affected by this ag income scenario. Next slide. The Planning Commission recommendations back on October 21st, 2021, had a vote of 6-1 to recommend denial for the proposal to the council. The issues that we discussed was the proposed changes to wetland provision, the increase in income 40 to 80 gross agricultural income for the agricultural zones, and then the change in appeal provisions. Next slide. And then I think I'm going to turn it back over to Susan for this part.
Thanks, Mike. Based on the Planning Commission recommendation for denial, staff did research on the process that will follow any county adoption process and the potential outcomes if the Clark County Code is found to be inconsistent with the management plan. So after county adoption, first Gorge Commission reviews the ordinance and suggests changes and sends it back to the county. if it's found to be inconsistent. Once received by the county has 90 days to make any modifications, adopt those modifications and resubmit the ordinance to the commission. The commission then has 60 days to respond. If the commission finds that the county code is still inconsistent with the plan, the Gorge Commission is then authorized to adopt a land use ordinance for the county within 90 days. The Gorge Commission does already have a land use ordinance adopted for another county, that's Klickitat County, and it's very likely that they would adopt the same ordinance for any other county that does not have an ordinance that is found to be consistent with the management plan. Once adopted, the Gorge Commission staff would then implement the ordinance within any county. And there would have to be coordination between Clark County staff and Gorge Commission staff if this happened in Clark County, because Gorge staff would only implement the Gorge ordinance and Clark County staff would implement all of the other ordinances. So any case would require coordination between those two parties. And it's important to note that community development currently receives a grant of about $20,000 every 2 years for implementation of the Gorge ordinance. And if county staff were no longer implementing the Gorge ordinance, this grant would likely be rescinded. Next slide, please. We also looked into the update process in other counties just to find out where it was at. We thought you may be interested in this. So the Gorge Commission does the planning for Klickitat County, and they are expected to adopt the ordinance on December 14th. Skamania County had their planning commission hearing last night. I have not gotten the results of that hearing yet, but their ordinance is scheduled to go to the commissioners in late November. Wasco County and Hood River County, their Board of Commissioners have already adopted ordinances. And in Multnomah County, the Planning Commission recommended approval on November 1st, and the ordinance is scheduled to go to the Board of County Commissioners on December 15th. And I'm going to turn it back over to Mike one last time to finish out the presentation.
Thanks, Susan. Next slide. So it just shows where we are at right now in the process and sort of our next steps. Right now, we're having the work session with the council, followed by the council hearing on December 7th. And once, if approved, then the ordinance goes to the Gorge Commission, and the Gorge Commission approves through a public hearing process of their own, and then it submits it to the Secretary of Agriculture, where the Secretary of Agriculture will look for concurrence and then move it forward from there. Next slide. Thank you for listening to our presentation, and we're going to open up to questions and or comments and go from there.
Thank you, Michael, Susan, and Oliver. So I'm going to start. First, I want to put this into context. I think one of your slides showed that we had 1.8% of the landmass of the entire scenic area. And then you broke it down. You answered the beginning of all my questions regarding how many properties will this impact in Clark County? And then ultimately, I think you necked it down to 25 for those private parcels that don't presently have residences. As to the one topic of going from 40 to 80,000 of gross revenue. So I don't know what role we have to oppose this. I mean, obviously the friction of jurisdictions, the Gorge Commission is setting policy here. We may disagree with it. We may agree with some of it. Obviously, our Planning Commission disagrees with some of it. But ultimately, only the courts can really rule on what role we have in basically potentially having a minority voice in these code changes. So that I just put that in context because we may disagree on some of this, and maybe we should voice that. But as far as ultimately not playing, I don't know if it's worth the effort since we have so little say in this entire process, unless the courts say we do ultimately. So that I couch that, but I am really disappointed in one thing here because I saw the letter that the commission had sent to some of the other counties that were questioning some of these changes, and it was so strongly worded. It began with, we're all in this together and we appreciate the cooperation, and then essentially did what you just did in echoing all of the bad things that are going to happen to our county if we don't comply. I mean, it was almost an extortion letter. Agree or you're going to be punished, and here are all the ways your constituents will be punished. And you just echoed that with the slide, and I thought that slide was you skipped one, and that's the one I want to hear about. Why did our planning commission question the wetlands change? Why did our planning commission question moving from 40,000 to 80,000? Why did they question the appeals process? I mean, there was no substantive presentation at all on those issues. And some of the other county commissioners have objected to a lot of the same things. There are a lot of changes. So I think there's a gap in this presentation that I'd still like you to fill if you're able to answer why our planning commission, what substantively did they object to? What were their arguments against? What did they think should happen differently? The other slide that you presented that I'm surprised about, because I shared it with the other counselors from one county, all of the letters of concern their county had sent to the commission. I was surprised that the status was essentially everybody's going to approve it, because I was getting a different message from some of the commissioners I had spoken with from some of the other counties. So I don't know if it is a foregone conclusion, if they're starting to generate opposition to some of these changes. So that is what it is as far as what the other counties are doing, what the status is. But I was somewhat surprised that it looked like a clean sweep, that they were all in agreement with these code changes, when I'm hearing something very different, and also seeing documented letters from different counties objecting to these changes. So I guess ultimately my question goes to, what dog do we have in this fight? And I would like to learn more about the wetlands. I know they're going to zero loss of wetlands on the surface. I don't disagree with that, but I'd like to know the details of why our planning commission did, what's different in the appeals process. And it seems kind of arbitrary and capricious to simply double the gross, the threshold for gross revenue for ag from 40 to 80,000. So those are my questions and comments.
Counselor, can I respond to some of that? This is, for the record, this is Chris Cook, Deputy Prosecuting Attorney.
Yes.
And so you have a number of questions there. What would you like me to start with? Planning Commission or the other counties, or what ability Clark County has to choose to go its own way?
Just start. I'm hoping staff will give us the detail on what the planning department commission found.
You don't want me to do that? I would say that the Planning Commission did it because they could. they know that their recommendation is not a final action of the county. That is your, that is an action that you, council, have the ability and authority to do. The planning commission
So,
does not.
Christine Cook, you're
And
just
each
saying
of
that
them-
they had no rational reason for
No,
objecting?
no.
Okay,
but-
well, that's what I want to hear.
And they didn't all object, by the way. One of them voted to go along with it. And each of them had, I would say, a different one of those items that they were concerned about. You know, one of them was irritated about the appeals process, and some of them were irritated about the 40 to 80, and some of them were irritated about the wetlands. Those are the three issues that they raised. So
Okay, that's completely unhelpful, but maybe
Yeah.
you can move on to the legal
You're
parts of
welcome.
it.
I summarized what they said. So let's see, the 40 to 80, again, that's a matter of inflation. The 40 had not changed over 30 years. So it obviously something worth $40,000 in 1990 is worth, you know, there would be more dollars attached to it now. And that is the rationale that the county has received from the Gorge Commission. I can't say that they're wrong or they're right there. I haven't done the inflation calculations myself, but that is the number that they came up with, and that is what is now in the guidelines. The other counties. So no county but Klickitat County has ultimately refused to adopt a gorge ordinance. Klickitat County refused to adopt a gorge ordinance that was consistent with the plan in 1994. And Klickitat County's ordinance has therefore been the ordinance adopted by the Gorge Commission since 1994. The Gorge Commission staff handles land use applications in the Gorge Scenic area for Klickitat County. So that model is up and running. Wasco County sent correspondence to the board, to the commission some time ago. And I believe that Wasco County and the commission staff worked through their issues. Now, one of the things that I am told that's interesting about the Wasco County ordinance is that I don't know what their reasoning is. I don't know the source of the dispute, but Wasco County decided that they did not wish to permit short-term rentals in the gorge lands under the requirements of the management plan. And so rather than adopt an ordinance that was inconsistent with those requirements, Wasco County simply is not going to be permitting short-term rentals in the gorge. It removed that piece of its ordinance entirely. So the county chose, rather than have these requirements they don't like and don't agree with and don't want, and for all I know, it's because they didn't want any short-term rentals at all in those lands. I just don't know. But the ultimate effect was that instead of adopting an ordinance that is inconsistent with the management plan, they chose to adopt no ordinance for that. So they will not be permitting any short-term rentals in the gorge. So that is a choice that Clark County could make for agricultural dwellings on large-scale agriculture and SMA agriculture. Could decide not to permit agricultural dwellings on that land at all. But, and I am not suggesting that you would want to do that. What I'm suggesting is that is one of the very limited options that the county has. With respect, there is very little discretion that the county has here. That is the way the system was set up in the National Scenic Area Act and by the Interstate Compact. So, you know, ultimately, that's why the other counties have gone along with it. No other county wants to be in the position of having an ordinance that is inconsistent with the management plan. And Counselor, you talk about the courts deciding that this system has been going on now for about 30 years. There have been cases that have gone to the courts, and none of them have suggested that the Gorge Commission cannot change the management plan and that the counties are not obligated to adopt a consistent ordinance once it does.
Mr. Vice Chair.
Is there any input that the staff wants to give on any of my original comments? Reading the letter to the governor of Oregon, I think the primary emphasis by those that were objecting was at the reliance or the lack of consideration of economic development, the issues of annexation, basically constraining any future development. This is going to have a significant impact throughout the gorge. Not so much in our county because we have so little of it. The Washougal pit may be impacted. I don't know. Maybe these 25 properties. I was just looking for some substance of what I guess our planning commission didn't have any substantive reasons for objecting to these changes. But before we go on to other counselor questions, does staff have any further input? Okay, Karen, go ahead.
Councilor, this is Oliver, if I may.
Yes, please.
I think I will say that Chris have summarizes the position of the Planning Commission. They did object to the no loss of wetland, and we explained it to them that this issue is going to be dealt on a case-by-case basis, and it doesn't necessarily mean that no permit will be issued. The question is going to be, how are we going to review the application that comes in? And I have Brent Davis here who can also chime in on the no loss of wetland issue. In terms of the appeals process, I think the objection of the Planning Commission, if I'm correct, was that, as Chris indicated, they didn't want the commission dictating for us what needs to happen. And I think they left that to the council to decide. That's my understanding of the objection to the appeal process. On the income threshold, they were also questioning how the commission arrived at the 80,000 gross income tax. And that's why they were asking us the question on which properties will be impacted if this were to go into effect. And that's why we said, okay, let's go look at what areas will this income tax be applicable. And we presented that to them, that the number in as much as it may be small, it's not insignificant because that affects some property owners. So that is how we presented that information. And as Chris indicated, the Gorge staff have shared the reasoning for us with us that it is all due to inflationary, inflation, and they're going to be indexed in that. I have no other reason to doubt that. And I think when we had our one-on-one with council, some of this new slide that we added was in response to that. What would happen if the council were to go along with the PC recommendation? And that's why we added the implications, not that we are throwing a hammer down on our own council, but that's really why it was more of a response. What will happen if we don't adopt a code consistent with the Gorge? I must also say that when I say we, the county first updated our code to be consistent with the Gorge, we had similar concerns. When the 40,000 was first proposed, the county objected to that, but eventually resubmitted a plan that was consistent with that 40,000. So eventually the 40,000 was accepted finally, and I'm sure that that will still be the case. Now, there isn't anything that we could do that's to say, well, our plan is partially consistent or mostly consistent. It is going to be either it is consistent or it's not. So that is all I can add, councilors.
Okay, thank you, Oliver. Okay, Councilor Bowerman, you had some questions.
Yes, thank you. I thought that your question, Gary, on the, or Councilor Medvigi, sorry, on the Planning Commission objections and what their reasons were was very important. So Oliver, thank you for beginning to address that. I think in this kind of session, it's very important that we understand what our own Planning Commission said after their extensive review, not what staff said in response to it only, but what did the Planning Commission understand and what was their point? So thank you for beginning that response. I did have two other questions. One was just kind of to set a groundwork. There was a list of changes that you showed starting on slide 7, I believe it was. What is the source of that list? Is it from staff or the Planning Commission or the Gorge Commission? Who was that? Who came up with that particular list?
That was from the Gorge Commission. Those are just some of the changes that were identified through the Gorge Commission management plan.
Thank you. And then secondly, I wondered, let's just do a what if, and I'm not suggesting that this would be the direction that council would go at all necessarily. But what if council said, well, we do have concerns about that income threshold, so we don't wish to go along with that particular change to 80K. Then when the Gorge Commission reviewed the overall approach of Clark County, would it be only that one point on which they would say there is an inconsistency, or would they look at the whole thing and change the whole thing with minutia on the words? Do you understand what I'm asking? Would they just focus in on the one area where there was the most major change, or a divergence of opinion from what the Gorge Commission had on its list? Or would they look at everything and say, well, we want an and here rather than a comma, whatever? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Counselor, I asked counsel for the Gorge Commission that exact question. I said, so say there are 500 changes that the Gorge Commission wants Clark County to make, and Clark County makes 499 of them. So there is one change that is not the way the Gorge Commission would like it to be, does that mean that the whole ordinance is inconsistent? Because, you know, that could be, as you said, a comma or an and or whatever.
Mhm.
The response was, the statute is binary. The National Scenic Act is binary. The Interstate Compact under RCW 4397, that's binary. Either it is consistent or it isn't consistent. And I think Oliver brought this up, and he said it could be that the commission believes that, for example, with that income test, because I asked him, so what if they adopt everything but the income test? He said it could be that the commission considers that particular facet of regulation of development on agricultural lands important enough to say that if that part of the plan is not complied with, that the county's ordinance would be inconsistent.
So given that, and given that the commission consists of people who would be examining this, so it's binary, and so it's inconsistent, what are they going to look at and propose changes? I would hope it would be just the one on which there is a discrepancy. Is that correct?
Well, if 499 are consistent and one is inconsistent, they shouldn't be proposing any changes. The purpose of the changes, and this is in the statute, is to make the ordinance consistent with the management plan. So that's what they would be looking at. They wouldn't, I don't think that they have the time or the staff to go nosing around a 170-page ordinance, really, for commas and ands that don't have a lot of significance to them.
That's good to know. Good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And Chris, I may add, this is Oliver Council, I may add that if it is that 80 gross income text that we omitted from our own code, they could ask that the county, and I'm not sure if that's going to be the policy of our councillors, that we not permit agricultural dwelling on the SMA and the large scale agriculture. That could be an outcome. In other words, the county will not be issuing any dwelling on ag, large scale ag and SMA ag, 80, 40 and the SMA ag. That may be the option. Okay, you're not going to, go ahead, Chris.
In order to do that, the county would have to adopt an ordinance that would not allow permits for agricultural dwellings on those lands. I don't know that the county wants to do that. As you say, of course, that's the council's decision. That is an option if you consider it an option.
I agree. I just want to put it out there, but I don't know if that's what the council want to do, but that could be the potential outcome.
Anything further, Karen?
No, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Olson, did you have any questions whatsoever?
I don't really have any questions. I just think it's pretty clear that we don't have a lot of options here, and the downside of not adopting the ordinance consistent with the management plan is, I don't think the outcome that is in our best interest of our community.
Yeah, I agree with that. And that's how I started this, with the 1.8% and the 25 partials that are impacted. I mean, in the back of my mind, having seen all the letters that went out to different entities in objection to some of this, I mean, it's too late for us to impact these changes. But I mean, we could adopt the changes but make a formal statement as to those that we objected to or disagree with. You know, basically, we're doing this under duress. I mean, we could consider doing that. Anyway, is there any other comment by counselor or staff? Oliver, Kathleen, anything further on this? Okay.
Yeah, comment, that's it. I'm sorry. I don't have any other comments, councillors.
So it's 9:46. Do we want to go ahead and take a short break and then start at 10, or do you want to roll right into council time and get a head start? You know,
I'd appreciate a short break.
Maybe just a 5-minute break.
okay. All right. Well, let's come back then in 5 minutes, depending on which clock I look at, about 10 of roughly. We'll see you back and we'll remain on this Zoom.